This is the question I get asked by avid readers of historical fiction, usually right after someone finds out what I write. How much research do you actually do? So today, I want to try and answer that, not just for my own writing process, but across the genre, using personal examples from two of my books, as well as digging into how a couple of best-selling historical fiction authors approach it themselves. And along the way, we'll get into the bigger question too. How do you actually write historical fiction, from research all the way through to the last page? If you're new here, welcome. I'm Tanya E. Williams, and I've spent the last decade writing historical fiction. And on this channel, we explore the craft, the history, and the stories behind historical fiction. And if you're back again, thanks for joining me. In this Historical Fiction 101 series, we tackle the question readers and writers ask most about the genre. So let's start with the long answer first. For Growing into Greatness, I spent 4 years researching wine, vineyards, and the effects of Prohibition and the Great Depression on the Napa Valley. 4 years. Before I'd written very much of the actual story at all, I was deep in the history of an industry, an era, and a region that I needed to understand from the inside out. In all honesty, when I traveled to Napa, I fell in love with the history, the landscape, and the people. And it was the people who impacted my research in the biggest way. In addition to being welcomed into the archives at the Napa Valley Historical Society, we were invited into winemakers' historic homes, vineyards, tasting rooms, and production facilities, all the while being regaled with stories of the past. I was inspired by innovations created out of necessity, and I was immersed in the life of grape growers and vintners and made some wonderful friends along the way. That kind of research isn't quick, and it isn't tidy, but it became a part of me and was exactly what let me write that world with confidence. Now, compare that to where I am right now. I'm finishing Hotel Hamilton Book 5, and there's a character, a Russian immigrant woman, who needed a completely different kind of research. I spent most of my research time in libraries, digging through immigration records, reading first accounts and correspondence from the era. I also boarded a train whose destination was Toronto, just so I could imagine what it might have been like to arrive in the city. So, even within my own books, research doesn't look the same twice. Sometimes it's 4 years. Sometimes it's a focused weeks-long deep dive into one character's specific world. The story tells you how much you need. And here's what's reassuring. If your own research process feels a little chaotic, you're in good company. Many historical fiction authors are known for spending months, sometimes years, buried in archives, old newspapers, letters, and photographs before they even write a single scene. Primary sources like diaries and letters are often treated as the gold standard because they capture how people actually lived, thought, and spoke. Not just what historians later decided was important. But almost every author agrees on one thing. At some point, you have to stop researching and start writing. The research, though, doesn't really end. It just changes shape. It becomes something you do alongside the draft, chasing down the detail you need exactly when your character needs it. I want to show you what that looks like for two authors many of you already know and love. In previous interviews, both of these authors recounted their research process. Kate Quinn, author of The Alice Network and The Rose Code, has talked about doing months of deep research before she ever starts drafting. What she calls getting comfortable in the world before she writes a word of it. But the timeline isn't fixed. One of her novels took 13 months to draft. Another took about 3.5. Research doesn't follow a formula, it follows a story. Hazel Gaynor, author of The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter and The Last Lifeboat, describes starting broad, understanding the larger historical moment first, and then narrowing in on finer details as the story develops. For her, research isn't a hurdle to get through. It's one of her favorite parts of writing, because it's how she makes a time and place feel real enough for readers to step into. 3 authors, 3 different rhythms, mine included, but the same underlying truth: real research done in service of a story that needs to feel lived in. So if research is where so much of historical fiction actually begins, what does that mean for writing it? In my experience, it comes down to a few things: knowing when your research is enough to start drafting, letting the story, not the research, lead once you do start, and accepting that you'll keep researching in small bursts the whole way through. Personally, I tend to approach writing after research with a focus on the character's journey, using the history to inform her thoughts, her worries, her motivations, and such. My favorite moments are when a historical event bumps up against my fictional character in a real way that makes writing feel magical. I'm also a sucker for the smallest historical tidbit researched and discovered at the exact moment my character requires it. Things like, did they have toasters in 1927? Becomes a short rabbit hole of discovery until I have a visual and understanding of how the newly invented appliance operated in everyday life. That's really the heart of how to write historical fiction well. Not research or story, but research in service of story. So the next time someone asks me how much research goes into a historical novel, I think my honest answer is enough to make it true, and not so much that I never start writing. There's no single right amount. There's just the amount your story needs to feel real. What's a historical detail in a novel that made you think, how did they ever find that? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, happy reading.